billionaire's empire was changed forever by a single mother's rejected interview and her daughter's infectious giggle. Hello, bestie. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The Lagos dawn was a symphony of competing sounds. But in Adana Nwosu's small apartment in the heart of Surulere, the most dominant note was the soft, even breathing of her 2-year-old daughter, Kamsi. Adana was already awake, had been for an hour, tracing the cracks on her ceiling as if they were a map to a better future. Today was the day, the interview at Adebayo Holdings. The words felt both like a prayer and a dare. It was more than a job. It was a lifeline, a junior architect position in their groundbreaking sustainable housing division. The salary alone would mean moving out of this one-room apartment with its perpetually coughing generator and the landlord who lurked like a specter every month end. It would mean a proper school for Kamsi, healthcare, a future built on something sturdier than hope and desperate prayers. She slipped out of the bed she shared with Kamsi, careful not to disturb the little girl who was sprawled like a starfish, her teddy bear clutched in a death grip. The morning light, filtering through the lone window with its frayed curtains, caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Adana ignored them. She had a ritual to perform. On a hanger behind the door was her armor, a navy blue suit shed painstakingly saved for. It wasn't designer, but it was well-tailored and spoke of a professionalism she fiercely claimed as her own. Next to it, on the small table that served as her desk, dining table, and drawing board, lay her portfolio. It was her heart bound in leather. Inside were the designs shed worked on late into the night, after Kamsi had finally fallen asleep, fueled by cheap coffee and towering dreams. Her designs were different. They incorporated passive cooling inspired by traditional Nigerian architecture, used local, sustainable materials, and focused on creating community spaces. They were homes designed for living, not just for owning. Her phone buzzed. A wave of relief washed over her. It was a confirmation message from the community creche shed booked for Kamsi. Your reservation for Kamsi Nwosu is confirmed for today, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Please be prompt. Thank you, Jesus, she whispered, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. That had been the biggest hurdle. She had no family in Lagos to help, and her friends were all in the same frantic struggle of building careers and raising children. The creche was affordable and safe. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She woke Kamsi gently, bathing her in the small, cracked bathroom, singing a silly, made-up song about a little bird going to see the king. Kamsi, her eyes still heavy with sleep, giggled and splashed the water. Adana dressed her in a clean, pretty yellow dress, her own little sunbeam. Mummy has a very important meeting today, my love, Adana said, brushing Kamsi's soft curls. You're going to play with Auntie Bose and the other children, yes? You'll be a good girl? Kamsi nodded solemnly, more interested in the button on her teddy bear's overalls. Good girl, she parroted. They left the apartment with time to spare. The Lagos morning hustle was in full swing. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and akara frying. Danfo buses roared past, conductors hanging off the sides yelling destinations. Adana held Kamsi's hand tightly, her portfolio tucked under her other arm, a shield against the chaos. She felt a flicker of optimism. The sun was shining. Kamsi was happy. The creche was booked. Her designs were strong. She had rehearsed her answers until she could recite them in her sleep. She allowed herself, for a single glorious moment, to imagine it. Walking into the gleaming Adebayo Tower, not as a visitor, but as an employee. Professional. A woman providing for her daughter. They arrived at the small, brightly painted building that housed the creche. Adana pushed the gate open, her smile ready for the proprietor, Auntie Bose. But Auntie Bose's face was a mask of apology before Adana even spoke. Ah, Adana. My dear, I have been trying to call your phone. Adana's heart stuttered. My phone? Has been acting up. The battery drains. What is it? Auntie Bose wrung her hands on her apron. It's my granddaughter. She has come down with measles. Measles. So suddenly. The health officials, they have said we must close immediately for the week. To quarantine. I am so sorry. I cannot take any children today. The world did not slow down. It screeched to a violent, crashing halt. The sounds of the street, the cars, the hawkers, the music, faded into a dull, roaring silence. Adana's carefully constructed future crumbled in the space of a single sentence. No, the word escaped her lips. A desperate, quiet plea. Auntie Bose, please. My interview is in 1 hour. This is my only shot. I cannot, my dear, Auntie Bose said, her eyes genuinely pained. It is the law. I could be fined. I am so sorry. Numbly, Adana turned away. She stood on the bustling sidewalk, holding Kamsa's hand, her portfolio suddenly feeling like a lead weight. Tears of sheer panic pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. No, not now. Think. She fumbled for her dying phone. She called Neoma, a friend from university. No answer. She called Chitty, a former colleague. The phone rang out. Everyone was at work, living the life she was desperately trying to grasp. Kamsi, sensing her mother's distress, tugged at her hand. Mummy? Play now? Adana looked down at her daughter's innocent, confused face. The hope in Kamsa's eyes was a knife to her heart. She couldn't cancel. She wouldn't. Not after fighting so hard to even get the interview. A reckless, wild resolve hardened within her. She had no choice. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath that did nothing to fill the hollow ache in her chest. Come on, baby, she said, her voice miraculously steady. She adjusted her grip on her portfolio and held Kamsa's hand tighter. You're coming with Mummy. The walk to the imposing Adebayo Tower was a march toward a looming cliff. With every step, the absurdity of her situation grew. A single mother, bringing her toddler to a professional interview at one of the most prestigious firms in Africa. It was professional suicide. She knew it. She entered the cool, marbled lobby, a stark contrast to the humid chaos outside. People in sharp suits glanced at her, their eyes lingering on Kamsi. Adana kept her chin high, her expression a mask of confidence she did not feel. She approached the receptionist. Adana Nwosu, I have a 10 a.m. interview with Human Resources for the junior architect position. The receptionist's smile was polite but froze slightly as her gaze fell on Kamsi. And the child? There was a last-minute emergency with her childcare, Adana said, the rehearsed lines sounding thin and pathetic even to her own ears. She will be no trouble. She's very quiet. The receptionist's smile tightened. She made a call, speaking in low tones. She gestured for Adana to take a seat in the waiting area. Adana sat on the edge of a plush leather chair, placing Kamsi on her lap. She pulled out a small, well-loved picture book from her bag, her emergency distraction kit. Look, Kamsi. See the doggy? She whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was fighting a battle before it had even begun, and she was already losing. But as she held her daughter close and felt the weight of her dreams in the portfolio at her feet, Adana Nwosu made a silent vow. She would walk into that interview room, and she would fight with everything she had. For Kamsi, for their future. This was her last shot, and she would not go down without a sound. The air in the interview room was cool, sterile, and smelled of lemon-scented polish and ambition. It was a stark, silent world away from the vibrant, chaotic energy of the Lagos streets, just beyond the double-paned glass. Adana Nwosu sat straight-backed in a sleek but uncomfortable chair, her hands folded neatly over her closed portfolio on the vast, polished mahogany table. Across from her sat two people. Mr. Okafor, the HR manager, a man with a carefully neutral face and eyes that seemed to catalog her every flaw, and Mrs. Adeyemi, the head of the architecture division, a severe-looking woman in a crisp gray suit whose expression gave nothing away. Your resume is unconventional, Ms. Nwosu, Mr. Okafor began, not looking at the paper in front of him. Several gaps. Freelance work. Adana kept her voice level, calm. Yes, after I graduated, I took time to care for my newborn daughter. The freelance work allowed me to maintain my skills while fulfilling my responsibilities as a mother. I believe it taught me exceptional time management and resilience. Mrs. Adeyemi gave a slight, non-committal nod. And what draws you specifically to our sustainable housing initiative? This was her moment. Adana leaned forward slightly, her passion cutting through her nerves. She opened her portfolio, her movements sure and practiced. This, she said, turning the large pages to face them. Her designs were not just blueprints. They were artistic renderings, filled with color and life. My concept is Eco-Isle, the home that cares. It's not just about sustainable materials, but a sustainable way of living. I've incorporated a central courtyard system, inspired by traditional Yoruba compound houses, to promote natural cross-ventilation and reduce the need for air conditioning by at least 40%. She pointed to another section. The roofing uses a combination of modern solar tiles and thatch for insulation, a design I adapted from Igbo architecture. The communal gardens here aren't an afterthought. They're the heart of the project, designed to foster community and provide food security. She was in her element. The words flowed, her ideas connecting into a compelling, beautiful vision. For a few glorious minutes, she forgot about the suit shed scrimped for, the daunting height of the tower she was in, even the gnawing anxiety about Campsie. She was just an architect, sharing her dream. Mr. Okafor looked mildly interested. Mrs. Adeyemi's severe expression had softened into one of genuine curiosity. She opened her mouth to ask a question. And that's when the first fuss came. Campsie, who had been remarkably quiet and engrossed in her picture book on the floor by Adana's feet, was growing bored. The shiny, interesting pen she'd been playing with had rolled under the table. She let out a small whimper of frustration. Adana's heart gave a single, hard thud. Without breaking eye contact with Mrs. Adeyemi, she subtly reached down, found the pen, and slipped it back into Campsie's hand, giving her tiny fingers a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "I'm sorry, please continue," Adana said, her smile tight. Mrs. Adeyemi nodded and asked her question about load-bearing calculations for the recycled material composites Adana had proposed. Adana answered, her voice still confident, but a part of her brain was now split, one half articulating complex architectural principles, the other half tuned to the smallest sound from her daughter. Campsie was quiet for another minute. Then, too, the pen was no longer enough. The room was big, cold, and there were no other children. She wanted her mother's full attention. She let out a louder, more plaintive whine. "Mummy." Mr. Okafor's pen stopped tapping. His eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. Mrs. Adeyemi's gaze flickered down to the child and then back to Adana, her previous curiosity now edged with impatience. "Just one moment," Adana murmured, her cheeks burning. She leaned down again, her voice a desperate whisper. "Shoo, my love. Just a little longer. Look at your book. See the cow?" But the magic of the book had worn off. Campsie, sensing the tension in her mother's voice and the stern looks from the strangers, began to cry in earnest. It wasn't a loud tantrum, but a steady, miserable sob of confusion and neglect. Fat tears rolled down her cheeks. The professional atmosphere in the room evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable awkwardness. "Ms. Nwosu," Mr. Okafor said, his voice dripping with a faux sympathy that was more cutting than anger. "This is a highly professional environment." "I know. I am so sorry," Adana said, her voice trembling as she lifted Campsie onto her lap. The child buried her wet face in Adana's suit jacket, her small body shaking with sobs. "She's never like this. There was a problem with her creche. It was a last minute. The integrity of our interview process is paramount," Mr. Okafor interrupted, closing his own folder with a definitive snap. "We simply cannot have disruptions. It's unfair to the other candidates." Mrs. Adeyemi said nothing. She just looked down at the beautiful, innovative designs now smudged by the tears of the architect who created them, a faint look of regret on her face before it settled back into neutral professionalism. "Please," Adana begged, the word tearing from her throat. "Just 5 minutes. I can calm her down. My designs. You haven't seen the interior layouts." Mr. Okafor stood up. The decision was made. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude the interview early. Thank you for your time, Ms. Nwosu. The dismissal was absolute. Humiliation, hot and bitter, washed over her. All the fight drained out of her. She was just a woman with a crying child, being ushered out of a room where she clearly didn't belong. With shaking hands, she gathered Kamsi, who was still sobbing, and her precious portfolio. She didn't look at Mrs. Adeyemi again. She couldn't bear to see the pity or the dismissal in her eyes. She walked out of the interview room, the door clicking shut behind her with a sound of finality that echoed in her soul. The gleaming, quiet hallway outside felt like a tunnel of shame. She stumbled to the nearest bench and sank onto it, pulling Kamsi close, rocking her gently as her own dreams shattered into a million silent pieces around them. She had fought so hard, and it had all been undone not by a lack of talent, but by the simple human need of her child. The world, it seemed, had no room for both. Benson Adebayo's world was one of calculated silence and controlled chaos. The executive floor of Adebayo Tower was a testament to this. A sanctuary of hushed voices, muted lighting, and the soft, percussive click of keyboards. He had just concluded a tense, but successful video conference with investors in Hong Kong, and the adrenaline of the deal was still thrumming in his veins. He preferred this state. It was clean, quantifiable, and left no room for messy complications. He strode from the conference room, his personal assistant, Tund, a step behind, seamlessly handing him a tablet with his afternoon schedule. The meeting with the Energy Minister has been moved to 4 p.m., sir. The draft proposal for the Lagos Island project is on your desk for final review. And your sister called again. She insists it's urgent, Tund recited, his voice a low, efficient murmur. Benson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Unless the company is on fire, my sister can wait. His personal life was a series of obligations he managed with the same detached efficiency as his business, but with far less satisfaction. It was as they crossed the expansive, art-adorned lobby towards his private elevator that the sound breached his carefully constructed environment. It was faint, but unmistakable. A child's cry. He paused, his polished Oxfords halting on the marble floor. Tund nearly walked into him. Sir? Benson held up a hand, silencing him. He listened. It was coming from the West Wing corridor, the hallway that led to the interview and mid-level management offices. It was a part of the building he rarely frequented, a realm delegated to his department heads. The sound was unprofessional, an anomaly in the pristine order of his empire. A frown etched itself onto his features. This was not part of the schedule. Is there a daycare center in this building I'm not aware of, Tund? He asked, his tone laced with a cold irritation. No, sir. Absolutely not, Tund replied, his own expression turning concerned. Company policy is very clear on that. Then explain that, Benson stated, not as a question but as a command. He changed course, his footsteps echoing with purpose as he headed toward the sound. Tund scurried after him, already pulling out his phone, ready to dispatch a facilities manager to handle whatever, or whoever, was causing this breach. As Benson turned the corner, the scene came into full view. It was, in a word, a mess, a disruption. A young woman was hunched on one of the minimalist benches head personally approved for the decor. Her posture was one of utter defeat. Her head bowed so low her chin nearly touched her chest. Beside her on the floor, a professional portfolio had spilled open, revealing architectural sketches that looked, from a distance, surprisingly detailed. And in her arms, she cradled the source of the offending noise. A small child, its face buried against her, emitting soft, hiccuping sobs. His first instinct was pure, unadulterated annoyance. This was a place of business, not a nursery. Had she wandered in off the street? Was she a disgruntled wife of an employee? His mind ran through logistical solutions. Summoning security, having her escorted out, and then finding out which department head had allowed this to happen on their watch. Someone's head would roll for this lack of discipline. He approached, his presence seeming to suck the air from the hallway. Tund hung back, knowing better than to interfere when his boss was in this kind of mood. "Is everything all right here?" Benson's voice was not loud, but it carried the full weight of his authority, a deep, resonant tone that usually made junior executives stammer. The woman jumped, startled, and looked up, and for the second time in as many minutes, Benson's expectations were derailed. He had expected perhaps a look of guilt, or entitlement, or frantic confusion. Instead, he saw a face etched with a humiliation so profound it was painful to witness. Her eyes, a warm, rich brown, were glistening with unshed tears, but they held a shocking core of dignity amidst the devastation. She wasn't a nuisance. She was a shipwreck survivor clinging to the last piece of driftwood. Before she could formulate an answer, a door further down the hallway flew open. A man Benson recognized as one of the junior HR managers, Okafor, he thought his name was, hurried out, his face a mask of flustered apology the moment he saw his CEO. "Mr. Adebayo, sir," Okafor stammered, practically bowing. "My most sincere apologies for this disturbance. It is being handled." Benson's sharp gaze moved from the terrified manager to the woman on the bench and back again. "Disturbance?" He repeated the single word, a demand for a full report. Okafor gestured nervously toward the woman. "An interviewee, sir. We had to conclude the session prematurely. The child was disruptive. Company policy, you understand, sir. Professional environment." He said the words as if reciting a holy mantra, hoping it would absolve him. Benson's frown deepened. He looked back at the woman. Adana, he would soon learn her name. The initial annoyance began to curdle into something more complex. This wasn't a random intrusion. This was a candidate his company had invited, and they had thrown her out because her child cried. He saw the whole pathetic story written in the slump of her shoulders and the HR manager's weaselly demeanor. A cold, quiet anger began to simmer beneath his polished surface. Inefficiency was one thing. Cruel, rigid stupidity was another. Professional environment, Benson echoed, his voice dangerously soft. He dismissed Okafor with a slight, almost imperceptible jerk of his head. "That will be all." The manager didn't need to be told twice. He vanished back into the interview room, the door closing with a soft click, leaving Benson alone in the hallway with the shattered woman and her crying child. The calculated silence of his empire had been broken. And for the first time in a long time, Benson Adebayo wasn't thinking about schedules, proposals, or investor meetings. He was looking at a problem that couldn't be solved with money or authority. He was looking at a human being. And he found himself, uncharacteristically, at a loss for what to do next. The silence left in the wake of the HR manager's retreat was heavier and more profound than any noise. It was a vacuum, filled only by Kamsis' dwindling, hiccuping sobs and the low, angry hum of the overhead lights. Benson Adebayo stood there, a monolith in a bespoke suit, his initial mission to eliminate a disturbance now completely derailed. The woman, Adana, had looked back down at her child, her shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. She was trying to soothe the little girl, her whispers a desperate, broken counterpoint to the child's misery. "Shoo NWAM, it's okay. Mummy's here, it's okay." Benson was a man of action. He solved problems. He issued commands. But this was a tangle of human emotion he had no blueprint for. The cold, efficient part of his brain suggested handing her a business card and instructing her to contact HR for a reschedule. But the sight of her, so utterly defeated in his gleaming multi-billion naira corridor, felt like a personal failure of the environment he had created. His empire had done this. He took a step closer, the sound of his shoe on the marble making her flinch minutely. He realized his usual towering presence was likely intimidating, not helpful. He needed to de-escalate, to understand. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was still deep, but he consciously sanded the edges off its command, aiming for something closer to neutral. She looked up again, and the raw shame in her eyes was like a physical thing. "Adana," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Adana Nwosu. And what position were you interviewing for, Adana?" He kept his questions simple, factual. A debrief. Something he understood. Junior architect, she said, her arms tightening around her daughter. In the sustainable housing division. Her gaze flickered to the spilled portfolio on the floor as if it were a corpse. I had designed a proposal. Just then, a small shift occurred. Kamsi, soothed by her mother's familiar embrace and perhaps curious about the new, low voice, lifted her head from Adana's shoulder. Her face was a mess of tears and redness, her breath still catching in little shudders, and she looked at him. Two wide, deep brown eyes, identical to her mother's, blinked slowly. They were full of the lingering upset of her crying fit, but now a new emotion was pushing through, curiosity. She studied the tall, strange man with the serious face and the sharp suit. Benson, for his part, looked back. He saw the tear-streaked cheeks, the tiny, heaving chest. He saw a child, small and vulnerable and utterly out of place. The corporate titan, the lion of industry, felt an unfamiliar and entirely unwelcome pang of something, not pity. It was more visceral than that, a recognition of pure, undiluted distress. He had no experience with children. They were foreign, unpredictable creatures. He awkwardly attempted to soften his expression, which probably made him look pained. Kamsi's lower lip, which had been trembling precariously, stilled. Her breathing evened out. She blinked again, and then it happened. A small, wet sound escaped her, a hiccup that morphed midway into a soft, airy giggle. It was utterly unexpected. A tiny, bell-like sound that seemed to bounce off the sterile walls and mock the very seriousness of the situation. Benson was completely and utterly disarmed. His carefully constructed facade of authority flickered and vanished, replaced by pure, unvarnished bewilderment. He hadn't done anything. Head just stood there. Why was she laughing? Kamsi giggled again, a little louder this time, as if his confused expression was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. A chubby hand, previously clutched around her mother's collar, released its grip and reached out towards him, not in fear, but in fascination. She was aiming for his face, for the sharp line of his jaw or perhaps his stern mouth. Adana stared, her own distress momentarily frozen in shock. Kamsi, no baby. But Benson found himself moving without conscious thought. The idea of this tiny, tear-stained creature finding him amusing was so absurd it short-circuited his usual protocols. He couldn't loom over her. Felt wrong. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself into a crouch. His expensive trousers pulled tight against his knees, and he was suddenly at eye level with the little girl on the bench. The world from down here was different. "And who is this fierce little queen?" he asked, his voice a gentle rumble he barely recognized as his own. He was speaking to the child, but the question was for Adana. "This is Kamsi," Adana said, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and confusion. She was watching the scene unfold as if it were a play in a language she didn't understand. "Kamsi," Benson repeated, the name feeling strange yet soft on his tongue. Now that he was closer, Kamsi's giggles turned into full, delighted laughter. She found his tie, a solid navy blue silk, and grabbed it with her whole hand, giving it a tentative tug. A sound escaped Benson then, a short, surprised huff of laughter. He let her pull on the tie, a garment worth more than some people's monthly rent. He didn't care. He made a funny face, crossing his eyes slightly. This sent Kamsi into absolute raptures. She laughed, a real, belly-deep baby laugh that was utterly contagious. She babbled something incoherent, shaking his tie now like it was her favorite toy. In that moment, the hallway was no longer a site of professional failure and humiliation. It was transformed. The billionaire on his haunches, the single mother watching in stunned silence, and the little girl who, with a single giggle, had dismantled a fortress of pride and protocol. The ice around Benson's heart didn't just crack. It shattered, flooded by a warmth he had not felt in years. He had come to investigate a problem, and instead, he had found a moment of unadulterated, joyful humanity. And he never wanted it to end. From his crouched position on the cool marble floor, Benson Adebayo's world had shrunk to the space between a child's laughter and the hem of his Brioni suit jacket. The calculated silence of his tower, the weight of his afternoon schedule, the lingering tension from the Hong Kong call. It all evaporated meaningless in the face of Kamsis' unbridled joy. She was utterly fascinated by him. Her tiny fingers, sticky from a forgotten snack, explored the crisp line of his jaw, patting his cheek as if testing to see if he was real. He remained perfectly still, a strange and wondrous statue come to life just for her. Every giggle that bubbled out of her was a tiny victory, a sound more valuable to him in that moment than the ringing of a closing bell on the stock exchange. His tie was her greatest treasure. She gripped it in both fists, babbling a stream of nonsense words, her eyes shining with delight as she gave it another experimental tug. "Careful there," he rumbled, his voice a soft parody of its usual command. "That's my favorite tie." He wasn't scolding. It was a game. Kamsi giggled, understanding the tone if not the words. She tugged again, harder. Benson played along. He let her pull him forward an inch, feigning a great struggle against her immense baby strength. "So strong. You're going to defeat me," he exclaimed in a mock-solemn tone. This was the height of hilarity. Kamsi shrieked with laughter, her whole body shaking with it. She released the tie and clapped her hands together. Adana watched, her earlier humiliation slowly being replaced by a dazed sense of unreality. The formidable Benson Adebayo, a man whose photograph was often next to headlines about multi-billion naira deals and corporate takeovers, was on his knees making funny faces for her daughter. His sharp, intelligent eyes, which she imagined usually saw through financial reports and people's motives with equal ease, were now crinkled at the corners with genuine mirth. He looked younger, softer, human. He caught her staring and his expression shifted slightly, the unguarded joy receding just a fraction, replaced by a look of quiet contemplation. He wasn't just playing with a cute child, he was seeing the whole picture. The talented architect, the devoted mother, the humiliating rejection. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind with the same speed and precision he used to analyze a business proposal. He turned his attention back to Kamsi, but his next move was strategic. He reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out not a phone or a contract, but a sleek, expensive pen, palladium finish, engraved with his initials. It was a weighty, serious object. He held it out to Kamsi. Her eyes went wide. It was shiny. It was new. It was infinitely more interesting than her old plastic toys. "For me?" he asked her, as if she were offering him a great gift. She nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing. He made a show of examining it, turning it over in his large hands. Then, with a deft movement, he clicked the top. Click-clack. The sound was satisfying. Kamsi was mesmerized. He offered it to her. She took it with the reverence of a queen accepting a scepter, her little fingers struggling to grip its girth. She immediately tried to click it herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. Benson used the moment of distraction to shift his weight. Still crouching, he moved to the side of the bench and sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him. It was an undignified position for a man of his stature, but he seemed utterly unconcerned. He was creating a new space, a more level playing field. He looked up at Adana. The power dynamic had completely inverted. He was literally at her feet. "Tell me about your design, Adana," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the hallway. It wasn't a CEO demanding a report. It was a man who had just been disarmed by a child's laughter, asking to understand the heart of the mother. The relocation of the interview had begun. The mahogany table and judgmental stares were gone. In their place was a marble floor, a captivated audience of one, and the soft, clicking sounds of a baby playing with a billionaire's pen. The marble floor was cool and hard beneath him, a stark contrast to the plush carpets of his office. Benson Adebayo, for whom entire boardrooms stood when he entered, was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, legs stretched out. A few feet away, Kamsi was engrossed in the mechanics of his expensive pen, clicking it with intense focus, each click-clack a tiny punctuation mark in the extraordinary conversation unfolding in the hallway. He had asked the question. Not about her childcare arrangements, not about the gaps in her CV. He had asked about the work, about her passion. For a moment, Adana just stared at him. The shift was too vast, too sudden. The man who had just been reduced to a giggling playmate by her daughter was now looking at her with an expression of genuine, undiluted interest. The humiliation of minutes before was receding, replaced by a fragile, fluttering hope. She took a breath, steadying herself. Then she leaned over and carefully gathered the pages that had spilled from her portfolio. Her hands were no longer shaking. "It's called Eco Isle," she began, her voice softer than it had been in the formal interview room, but laced with a new strength. She held up a rendered image. It wasn't a cold, technical blueprint. It was a watercolor painting of a vibrant community. The home that cares. It's a concept for low-cost, high-density housing, but it's designed to feel like the opposite. Benson took the page. His eyes, usually scanning for profit margins and risk assessments, now traced the curves of the buildings, the green spaces woven between them. "The core is the central courtyard," Adana explained, her finger tracing the shape on the page. She was no longer reciting. She was sharing a dream. "It's based on the traditional African compound. It's not just for aesthetics. It creates a natural wind tunnel, pulling cool air through the entire complex. See the orientation? The buildings are angled to maximize shade during the hottest parts of the day. I've run the models. It could reduce the dependency on air conditioning by 40%, maybe more. The energy savings for the residents would be significant." Benson's eyebrows rose. He wasn't an architect, but he was a builder. He understood efficiency. He understood cost savings. This was smart. "The materials," she continued, her passion overtaking her nerves. She shuffled to another page, showing detailed cross-sections. "Instead of imported steel and concrete, I'm proposing compressed earth blocks stabilized with a small amount of cement. They're made from local soil, they have excellent thermal mass, they stay cool, and they're a fraction of the cost. The roofing is a combination of recycled metal and thatch for insulation, a modern take on a classic design." She showed him the communal gardens, the playgrounds integrated into the landscape, the rainwater harvesting systems designed to look like decorative features. "It's not just about putting a roof over people's heads," she said, her voice dropping, becoming more personal. She glanced at Campsey, who was now trying to draw on the marble with the pen. "It's about giving them a home, a place where community can grow, a safe, beautiful place for children to play, a place that cares for its residents and for the environment. That's sustainability. It's human and environmental." Benson was silent for a long moment, studying the pages in his hands. He saw it now. He saw the brilliance he had missed in her CV. The gaps and freelance work had forced her to think differently, to be innovative out of necessity. She wasn't just designing buildings. She was designing a better way of life. Her perspective wasn't from an ivory tower. It was from the ground up, from the perspective of a mother who wanted the world for her child. He looked from the beautiful, thoughtful designs to the woman who created them, sitting defeated on a bench just moments ago. He looked at the little girl who had found joy in his tie. The rigid, corporate thinking of his HR manager seemed idiotic now. A liability. He had almost let this talent, this unique vision, walk out of his building because of a policy manual. He handed the pages back to her with a newfound respect. "These are exceptional, Adana," he said, and the words were simple, but carried the weight of his conviction. He stood up, brushing off his trousers. The moment of informal intimacy was over, but the connection had been made. He was Benson Adebayo, CEO, again, but he was a different version of himself now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp, white business card. It was simple, elegant, embossed only with his name and a personal phone number. No title was necessary. "The interview isn't over," he said, his voice firm but kind. "It's merely relocated. Be at my office on the top floor tomorrow at 10 a.m. He saw the panic flash in her eyes, the same childcare dilemma, and he anticipated it. "Bring Campsey." He gestured toward his personal assistant, Tund, who had been waiting at a respectful distance, trying very hard to look like he hadn't just witnessed his boss' entire worldview shift on its axis. My assistant, Mrs. Chitty, will be here. She has grandchildren. She considers it a personal insult if a day goes by without a child to spoil. Campsie will be in excellent hands. He was offering her more than a second chance. He was offering her a solution. He was acknowledging the whole package, the architect and the mother. Adana took the card, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from a surge of overwhelming, incredulous hope. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Well, be here. Benson gave a final, brief nod, his eyes lingering for a second on Campsie, who chose that moment to look up and offer him a pen-covered, gummy smile. Then he turned and walked away, Tund falling into step beside him, already making a note on his tablet. The hallway returned to its quiet stillness, but the air was different. It was charged with the promise of a new beginning, all because a billionaire had sat on the floor and truly listened. The elevator ride to the penthouse suite of Adebayo Tower was a vertical journey into a different world. The mirrored walls reflected Adana's nervous expression back at her, navy suit feeling both like armor and a costume. Campsie, perched on her hip, was fascinated by the pretty lady in the glass, pointing and babbling. The doors slid open without a sound, revealing a reception area that was the antithesis of the hectic HR floor below. Here, the silence was deep and expensive. The air smelled subtly of sandalwood, and the morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking, dizzying panorama of Lagos. A sleek, minimalist desk of polished ebony stood sentinel, and behind it sat an older woman with a kind, intelligent face and glasses on a chain around her neck. This was Mrs. Chitty. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, went first to Adana, noting her professional attire and the portfolio clutched in her hand, and then immediately softened as they landed on Campsie. "You must be Adana," she said, her voice a warm, melodic contrast to the sterile luxury of the room. She stood up, her movements graceful and unhurried. "And this," she said, her entire face breaking into a genuine smile, "must be the famous Campsie. Mr. Adebayo said I was to expect a very important little visitor." Campsie, usually shy with strangers, was captivated by Mrs. Chitty's glittering glasses. She reached for them with a curious coo. "Oh, you like these, do you?" Mrs. Chitty chuckled, gently taking them off and letting Campsie hold them. "Come, my dear, I have a surprise for you." She gestured to a small, sun-drenched alcove off the main reception that Adana hadn't noticed. It wasn't a daycare. It was too elegant for that. But it was clearly a space designed for a child. A beautiful woven rug covered the floor, scattered with a few tasteful, wooden educational toys. A small bookshelf held children's books, and a tiny table and chairs were set by the window. "I hope this is all right," Mrs. Chitty said to Adana, seeing her stunned expression. "My grandchildren visit sometimes. Mr. Adebayo had this put in a few years ago. He doesn't like them getting underfoot in his office." She said it with a fondness that suggested Benson's relationship with her family was more personal than professional. The knot of anxiety in Adana's chest loosened its grip. Campsie was already wriggling to get down, her eyes on the colorful stacking rings. It's perfect. Thank you. No trouble at all. You go on in. He's expecting you." The door to Benson's office was a massive slab of dark wood. Adana knocked, once her heart hammering against her ribs. "Enter." Benson's office was what she had expected and yet nothing like she'd imagined. It was vast, dominated by the staggering city view. But it wasn't cold. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, filled not with legal volumes, but with books on history, art, and architecture. Models of past Adebayo Holdings projects were displayed on plinths, but so were several striking pieces of Nigerian modern art. His desk was clear but for a single monitor and a framed photograph she couldn't see. He wasn't behind the desk. He was standing by the window holding 2 mugs of coffee. He turned and offered her one. "Adana, good morning. I hope Mrs. Chitty has adequately distracted your co-pilot." She took the mug, her fingers brushing his. "Yes, sir. Thank you. She's wonderful. She's been with me for 20 years. She's the real CEO, he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. He gestured to a comfortable seating area, 2 armchairs facing the view. Shall we? This was nothing like the interrogation across the mahogany table. He didn't open with questions about her CV. Instead, he asked about her journey about where she lived, about her thoughts on the city's infrastructure, easy conversational warm-ups that put her at ease. Then he nodded to her portfolio. Show me. She laid her designs out on the low table between them. The sunlight made the watercolor renderings glow. She went through her presentation again, but this time it was a dialogue. He asked sharp, insightful questions. The compressed earth blocks, what's the maintenance schedule? How do you combat the perception of it being inferior to concrete? The courtyard design is brilliant for ventilation, but what about security? How do you ensure it's a safe space, not a vulnerable one? The communal gardens, who maintains them? The residents? The corporation? How do you build that into the ownership model? He was challenging her, but not to trip her up. He was engaging with the ideas, probing their weaknesses to make them stronger. He saw the business implications, the social impact, the long-term viability. He was, she realized, a visionary himself. At one point, a soft giggle echoed from the reception area. Benson's attention momentarily drifted from a structural detail to the closed door, a faint, unconscious smile touching his eyes before he refocused on her. The interview lasted an hour. When she finished, she felt exhilarated, not drained. She had been heard. Benson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Your designs are more than exceptional, Adana. They're revolutionary. They have heart and a shrewd business sense. That's a rare combination. He paused, his gaze intense. The junior architect position you applied for. It's beneath you. Your vision is too large for a junior role. Adana's heart sank. Was this a polite rejection after all? In creating a new lead design role within the sustainable division, he continued. The portfolio would be smaller to start, but the creative freedom would be greater. I want you to head it. I want Eco Isle to be our flagship project for the next fiscal year. Adana's breath caught in her throat. Lead designer. Her own project. It was beyond her wildest dreams. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The salary and benefits package will be sent to you by this afternoon. HR will handle the formalities. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Welcome to Adebayo Holdings, Adana. As she gathered her portfolio, her hands were steady. She walked out into the reception area. Kamsi was sitting on Mrs. Cheetah's lap, listening intently to a story, a contented smile on her face. She had done it, not by hiding her motherhood, but in spite of it, and perhaps in the most unexpected way because of it. The second chance hadn't just been given. It had been seized. The corridor of shame had led, impossibly, to a sun-drenched office at the top of the world. The first few weeks at Adebayo Holdings were a whirlwind of security badges, HR orientations, and the dizzying process of being handed the keys to her own professional kingdom. Adana was given a spacious office with a window that, while not offering the godlike view of Benson's penthouse, still provided a thrilling slice of the Lagos skyline. Her title, Lead Design Architect, Sustainable Initiatives, was etched on the door in bold lettering. Still didn't feel real. Her first official meeting about the Eco Isle project was held in one of the company's sleek conference rooms. Benson was there, along with a team of senior engineers, financial analysts, and project managers, mostly men, all seasoned veterans of Adebayo's empire. Adana, the newcomer, the young woman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere to lead a pet project, felt their skeptical eyes on her as she set up her presentation. She took a steadying breath, remembering the feeling of sitting on the hallway floor. She wasn't that woman anymore. She clicked the first slide onto the screen. Thank you for being here. Eco Isle isn't just a housing project, she began, her voice clear and confident. It's a proof of concept, a blueprint for how Lagos can grow without losing its soul or strangling its environment. She launched into her designs, but this time, she was ready for the hard questions. When the head engineer, A gruff man named Mr. Bello pointed to her compressed earth blocks and said, "It's mud. It won't last 5 years in the rainy season." She was ready. "With respect, sir," Adana countered, bringing up a slide with stress test results and case studies from successful projects in Ghana and Burkina Faso. Stabilized earth blocks have a compressive strength comparable to concrete. They're more fire-resistant and, crucially, their thermal properties will save residents up to 30% on cooling costs. The initial cost savings on materials can be redirected to the community infrastructure. Benson, who had been silently observing, arms crossed, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the validation she needed. When a financial analyst questioned the ROI on the communal gardens and playgrounds, arguing for more units instead, Adana didn't flinch. "The return on investment isn't just in Naira," she said, her passion cutting through the cold numbers. "It's in community health, in social cohesion, in creating a place where people want to live and raise families. That stability attracts long-term tenants, reduces turnover costs, and builds the Adebayo brand as one that cares about more than profit. That brand equity is financial value." She was holding her own, but the resistance was palpable. It was Benson who broke the stalemate. "She's right," he said, his voice cutting through the room's doubt. He didn't raise it. He simply stated it as fact. "We're not just building houses. We're building a legacy. Proceed with the specifications as Ms. Nwosu has outlined." His support was a shield, and it gave her the space to prove herself. After the meeting, as the others filed out, he lingered. "A solid defense, Adana. You prepared." "I had to," she replied, a tired but triumphant smile on her face. "I knew they'd come for the earth blocks first." He fell into step beside her as they walked back towards her office. "The board needs convincing. A working lunch tomorrow? We can go over the points for the presentation." It became a pattern. Working lunches in his office or a quiet corner of the executive dining room. Initially, the talk was all business. Zoning laws, material supply chains, community engagement strategies. But over club sandwiches and sparkling water, the conversation began to meander. He'd ask about her time at university, and she'd tell him about the late nights in the design studio, and it would remind him of his own early days, sleeping on a cot in his first warehouse. She'd mention the challenge of finding a reliable plumber in Surelier, and he'd laugh, a real, unguarded sound, and confess he hadn't unclogged a drain in 20 years, but remembered the frustration vividly. One afternoon, as they pored over site maps, Kamsa's name came up. Mrs. Chitty had brought her down to say goodnight because she'd been asking for her mother. "She's settled in well with Mrs. Chitty," Benson remarked after Kamsi had been whisked away again, blowing kisses. "She adores her," Adana said, her face softening. "It's such a relief. It's like having family nearby." The word hung in the air between them, intimate and vulnerable. Benson was quiet for a moment. It must be incredibly difficult, doing it all alone. It was the first personal probe, a gentle step across the professional line. Adana looked down at her hands, then back at him. The usual deflection, "We manage," died on her lips. His gaze wasn't pitying. It was genuinely curious. "It is," she admitted, the truth a quiet confession. "Some days it feels like you're running a marathon with a backpack full of rocks. You're tired all the time. You feel guilty for working, guilty for being tired, guilty for every minute you're not giving her your absolute best. But then she'll laugh or learn a new word, and it's all worth it. She's my why." Benson listened, truly listened, in a way she suspected few people ever had. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix it. He just absorbed her reality. "Your why is a powerful thing," he said finally, his voice low. "It's a stronger motivator than any bonus or title." He looked out at the city, his own reflection faint in the glass. "For a long time, my why was just more. More success, more money, more buildings with my name on them. It's a hollow thing to chase." The admission was startling in its honesty. The billionaire was showing her the empty rooms inside his own gilded tower. In those lunches, a blueprint of a different kind was being drawn. Not of houses, but of a connection. They were two individuals from impossibly different worlds, finding that the architecture of their struggles and their dreams, while built from different materials, shared a similar shape. He was learning about her strength, her resilience, her fierce love, and she was catching glimpses of the man behind the empire. Not just a titan, but a person who, for all his power, understood what it was to have a void that needed filling. The transformation was subtle at first, a gradual shifting of gears from professional regard to personal interest. Benson Adebayo, a man who had built an empire on decisive action, found himself navigating the unfamiliar, delicate terrain of courtship. The working lunches continued, but the folders of architectural plans began to share table space with more personal inquiries. He started to remember the small things. He noticed she took her coffee with a splash of milk, no sugar, and one morning, a cup prepared exactly that way was waiting for her beside the site models. He recalled her mentioning a fondness for ofada rice, and the following week, a discreetly catered lunch from a renowned local restaurant specializing in it appeared in his dining room. It was no longer just about eco-aisle. It was about her. "Your mother," he asked one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. "You mentioned she lives in Enugu. Does she get to see Kamsi often?" The question surprised Adana. "Not as often as she'd like, or as I'd like. The travel is complicated." Benson simply nodded, storing the information away. A few days later, as they were wrapping up for the evening, he made an offhand comment. "My pilot mentioned he's doing a routine flight check on the company plane to Enugu this Saturday. Plenty of empty seats. Seems a waste to fly empty. If you and Kamsi ever wanted a quick visit." It was so casually offered, yet so immense. Adana stared at him, speechless. It wasn't a gift of money. It was a gift of time, of connection, of removing a burden he had heard in her voice. She saw the careful nonchalance in his expression, the slight tension that revealed how much her answer mattered. "Benson, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said, echoing his words from her job offer. But this time his tone was softer, a question rather than a command. The trip to Enugu was a revelation. The sheer, effortless ease of it, being driven to a private airfield, Kamsi's wide-eyed wonder at the big bird, the smooth, hour-long flight that replaced a grueling 6-hour road journey, her mother's tears of joy at seeing them, and her stunned, reverent look at the man who had made it possible, cemented something for Adana. His power wasn't just for boardrooms. He could wield it to create moments of pure, unadulterated happiness. But it was the smaller, quieter moments that truly began to unravel her defenses. He began to show up places, not with fanfare, but with a simple, grounding presence. One rainy Thursday, her ancient Volkswagen Beetle finally gave up the ghost on the third mainland bridge during rush hour. Panicked, with a tired and hungry Kamsi in the back seat, Shed called a tow truck, then sat feeling utterly defeated as the storm raged outside. Her phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Benson. "Where are you?" "Exactly." Before she could properly explain, a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows pulled up behind her, its hazard lights cutting through the downpour. Benson himself stepped out, an umbrella held aloft against the lashing rain. He didn't chide her for her old car. He simply took charge. "Tund will wait for the tow truck. Let's get you two home." He drove them himself, his large hands steady on the wheel, making quiet, reassuring conversation with a now chattering Kamsi, completely unfazed by the chaos of the storm and the traffic. He started to integrate himself into their world, not just whisking them into his. One Saturday, he appeared at the doorstep of her Surelier apartment, dressed not in a suit, but in simple linen trousers and a polo shirt. He looked out of place and entirely comfortable with it. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which was a blatant lie. "I thought, perhaps we could go to the park." That afternoon, Adana watched from a bench as Nigeria's most formidable billionaire pushed her daughter on a swing, his deep laugh mingling with Kamsi's shrieks of delight. He bought them ice cream, and she watched, her heart doing a strange, slow flip as he patiently helped Kamsi wipe sticky chocolate from her chin, utterly ruining his expensive shirt without a second thought. He was trying. not with grandiose, empty gestures, but with consistent, thoughtful action. He was learning the rhythm of their lives and finding a way to harmonize with it. Of course, his world noticed. A casual dinner at a high-end restaurant. His attempt at a proper date was interrupted by a business associate who clapped Benson on the back a little too heartily, his eyes scanning Adana with open curiosity. "Benson, didn't expect to see you here. And who is this?" The tone was familiar, implying she was a temporary diversion. Benson's arm, which had been resting lightly on the back of her chair, moved to her shoulder, his touch firm and possessive. "David, this is Adana Nwosu, the brilliant lead architect heading our new sustainable housing division." "Adana, this is David, a bore who interrupts private dinners." The correction was swift, cold, and left no room for ambiguity. David retreated, chastened. Benson didn't apologize for him afterward. He simply looked at Adana and said, "His opinion is irrelevant." The courtship was a dance on a double-edged sword. On one side was the breathtaking view from his world. The kindness, the security, the sheer force of being cared for by a man like him. On the other was the constant, whispering scrutiny, the knowledge of the gap they had to bridge, and the quiet, terrifying fear that she was navigating a dream from which she would eventually, inevitably, wake up. But with every pushed swing, every rescued breakdown, every defended introduction, Benson was proving, action by action, that his interest was not a whim. It was a blueprint he was intent on building into something real. The success of Eco Isle was becoming a reality. The initial site had been cleared, the first stabilized earth blocks were being tested, and Adana's vision was literally rising from the ground. Her confidence grew with each passing day, nurtured by Benson's unwavering support and the joyful normalcy they were building. For the first time, her future felt not like a desperate climb, but a bright, open horizon. The shadow fell on a Tuesday. She was reviewing masonry samples in her office when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Assuming it was a supplier, she answered briskly. "Adana Nwosu." Well, Adana Nwosu. Fancy title now, I hear." The voice was like oil slick on water. Smooth, familiar, and deeply unpleasant. It was a voice from a chapter of her life she had worked tirelessly to close. Chi-ji. Her blood ran cold. She hadn't heard from Kamsis' father in over a year. Not since Head decided the responsibilities of parenthood were too heavy a burden and vanished, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid bills. "How did you get this number?" she asked, her voice tight. "A man has ways of finding out when his woman starts moving up in the world," he said, his tone dripping with false camaraderie, "especially when she's moving in the circles of a man like Benson Adebayo. Big news, pictures in the paper and everything." The gossip columns had indeed started running blurry photos of them, leaving a restaurant at the park with Kamsi. The caption always some variation of, "Billionaire bachelor Benson Adebayo with mystery woman and child." "What do you want, Chi-ji?" She cut in, her patience evaporating. "What do I want?" He feigned hurt. "I want to see my daughter. Father has rights." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. You gave up any rights when you walked out and stopped answering your phone for 18 months. You have no idea what she looks like now. "A mistake I'm eager to correct," he said smoothly. "But, Lagos is an expensive city. Hard for a father to provide presents, to take his little girl nice places, to stay quiet about how her rich new daddy might not be so keen on a messy past cluttering up his perfect life." The threat was as clear as it was ugly. He wasn't interested in Kamsi. He was interested in a payday. He saw Benson's fortune and thought Head found a tap to turn on. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her hand trembling so violently she nearly dropped the phone. "You stay away from us." "Well, see," he sang. "Give my love to the big man." The line went dead. Adana sank into her chair, the high-quality masonry samples blurring before her eyes. The fear was instant and paralyzing. This was the chaos she had fought so hard to escape. This was the past, reaching its grubby hands into her beautiful, fragile present, threatening to stain everything. She couldn't tell Benson. The thought was her first panicked instinct. He was a man of order and control. How would he react to this kind of messy blackmail? Would he see her as a complication? Would the beautiful dream she was living shatter under the weight of her past poor judgment? For 2 days, she carried the secret like a stone in her stomach. She jumped every time her phone rang. She was distracted during meetings, her smile during dinners with Benson strained and artificial. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. He started to integrate himself into their world, not just whisking them into his. One Saturday, he appeared at the doorstep of her Surelier apartment, dressed not in a suit, but in simple linen trousers and a polo shirt. He looked out of place and entirely comfortable with it. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which was a blatant lie. "I thought, perhaps we could go to the park." That afternoon, Adana watched from a bench as Nigeria's most formidable billionaire pushed her daughter on a swing, his deep laugh mingling with Kamsa's shrieks of delight. He bought them ice cream, and she watched, her heart doing a strange, slow flip as he patiently helped Kamsi wipe sticky chocolate from her chin, utterly ruining his expensive shirt without a second thought. He was trying, not with grandiose, empty gestures, but with consistent, thoughtful action. He was learning the rhythm of their lives and finding a way to harmonize with it. Of course, his world noticed. A casual dinner at a high-end restaurant. His attempt at a proper date was interrupted by a business associate who clapped Benson on the back a little too heartily, his eyes scanning Adana with open curiosity. "Benson, didn't expect to see you here. And who is this?" The tone was familiar, implying she was a temporary diversion. Benson's arm, which had been resting lightly on the back of her chair, moved to her shoulder, his touch firm and possessive. "David, this is Adana Nwosu, the brilliant lead architect heading our new sustainable housing division." "Adana, this is David, a bore who interrupts private dinners." The correction was swift, cold, and left no room for ambiguity. David retreated, chastened. Benson didn't apologize for him afterward. He simply looked at Adana and said, "His opinion is irrelevant." The courtship was a dance on a double-edged sword. On one side was the breathtaking view from his world. The kindness, the security, the sheer force of being cared for by a man like him. On the other was the constant, whispering scrutiny, the knowledge of the gap they had to bridge, and the quiet, terrifying fear that she was navigating a dream from which she would eventually, inevitably, wake up. But with every pushed swing, every rescued breakdown, every defended introduction, Benson was proving, action by action, that his interest was not a whim. It was a blueprint he was intent on building into something real. The success of Eco Isle was becoming a reality. The initial site had been cleared, the first stabilized earth blocks were being tested, and Adana's vision was literally rising from the ground. Her confidence grew with each passing day, nurtured by Benson's unwavering support and the joyful normalcy they were building. For the first time, her future felt not like a desperate climb, but a bright, open horizon. The shadow fell on a Tuesday. She was reviewing masonry samples in her office when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Assuming it was a supplier, she answered briskly. "Adana Nwosu." Well, Adana Nwosu. Fancy title now, I hear." The voice was like oil slick on water. Smooth, familiar, and deeply unpleasant. It was a voice from a chapter of her life she had worked tirelessly to close. Gigi. Her blood ran cold. She hadn't heard from Kamsa's father in over a year. Not since Head decided the responsibilities of parenthood were too heavy a burden and vanished, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid bills. "How did you get this number?" she asked, her voice tight. "A man has ways of finding out when his woman starts moving up in the world," he said, his tone dripping with false camaraderie, "especially when she's moving in the circles of a man like Benson Adebayo. Big news, pictures in the paper and everything." The gossip columns had indeed started running blurry photos of them, leaving a restaurant at the park with Kamsi. The caption always some variation of, "Billionaire bachelor Benson Adebayo with mystery woman and child." "What do you want, Gigi?" She cut in, her patience evaporating. "What do I want?" He feigned hurt. "I want to see my daughter. Father has rights." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. You gave up any rights when you walked out and stopped answering your phone for 18 months. You have no idea what she looks like now. A mistake I'm eager to correct, he said smoothly. But, Lagos is an expensive city. Hard for a father to provide presents, to take his little girl nice places, to stay quiet about how her rich new daddy might not be so keen on a messy past cluttering up his perfect life. The threat was as clear as it was ugly. He wasn't interested in Campsie. He was interested in a payday. He saw Benson's fortune and thought he'd found a tap to turn on. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her hand trembling so violently she nearly dropped the phone. "You stay away from us." "Well, see," he sang. "Give my love to the big man." The line went dead. Adana sank into her chair, the high-quality masonry samples blurring before her eyes. The fear was instant and paralyzing. This was the chaos she had fought so hard to escape. This was the past, reaching its grubby hands into her beautiful, fragile present, threatening to stain everything. She couldn't tell Benson. The thought was her first panicked instinct. He was a man of order and control. How would he react to this kind of messy blackmail? Would he see her as a complication? Would the beautiful dream she was living shatter under the weight of her past poor judgment? For 2 days, she carried the secret like a stone in her stomach. She jumped every time her phone rang. She was distracted during meetings, her smile during dinners with Benson strained and artificial. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. They were at his penthouse, Campsie asleep in the guest room after an evening of storytelling. Benson handed her a glass of wine. "You've been quiet tonight. Something's weighing on you. Is it the project? The media attention?" She looked at him, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and the wall shed built around her secret crumbled. The words tumbled out in a rushed, ashamed whisper. "Chija's call, the threat, the blackmail. I'm so sorry," she finished, tears of humiliation and fear finally spilling over. "I thought he was gone for good. I never wanted to bring this drama into your life." Benson listened, his expression hardening from concern to something else entirely. It wasn't anger at her. It was a cold, focused fury directed at the threat itself. He set his wine glass down with a precise click. He didn't offer empty reassurance. He didn't flinch from the messiness. He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and steady, a command that brooked no argument. "You have nothing to apologize for. His actions are his own failure, not your shame." He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up his phone. He didn't make a dramatic call. He sent a single, quiet text. Then he returned to her. "This is what we are going to do," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "You will block his number. You will not speak to him again. If he contacts you through any other means, you will forward it immediately to me and to Tund. You will not be alone with him, ever. My security team is now your security team. They will be discreet, but they will be there." Adana stared at him, stunned by the swift, absolute nature of his response. "Your security team? Benson, that's not necessary." "It is necessary," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "He threatened my family. That is a line that cannot be crossed. My family." The words hung in the air, a vow more binding than any contract. "But what will you do?" she asked, fear for what he might do warring with gratitude. A shadow of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I will have a conversation with him, a very clear one. He believes he can play a game with powerful people. I will simply explain the rules to him. My rules." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The quiet certainty in his voice was more powerful than any boast. He would handle it. He would protect what was his. The stone of fear in her stomach began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of safety. The shadow of the past hadn't sent him running. It had revealed the fierce, protective strength of the man standing beside her. He hadn't just accepted her past. He had shouldered it, ready to stand between it and their future. The threat hadn't broken them. It had forged them closer together. The threat of Chi-Ji had been neutralized with the quiet, brutal efficiency that was Benson Adebayo's signature. He never told Adana the details of the conversation Head had, and she never asked. All she knew was that the calls stopped. The ominous feeling of being watched evaporated. The shadow receded, leaving only the bright, sometimes blinding, light of her new reality. But the encounter had planted a seed, and in the fertile soil of her insecurities, it began to grow. It was no longer an external threat she feared, but an internal one. The gnawing, persistent doubt that she truly belonged in Benson's world. It began with the media. The blurry paparazzi photos were replaced by society page features. Who is the mystery mother capturing the billionaire's heart? The articles were a mix of fascination and thinly veiled skepticism. They dug up her background, a talented but unknown architect from a middle-class family, and contrasted it sharply with Benson's empire. Comment sections were a minefield of speculation. Gold digger, a ready-made family for a lonely man. She's pretty. But for how long? She tried to brush it off, but the words stuck like burrs. Then came the event. A charity gala at the Musen Center. Benson had insisted she accompany him. "It's time they saw us together properly," Head said. A statement of fact, not a request. Mrs. Chitty had helped her find a dress. A stunning, emerald green gown that made her feel like a queen. Benson's eyes had darkened with appreciation when he saw her. "You take my breath away," Head murmured, and for a moment, she believed it. The gala was a whirlwind of crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, and the most beautiful people she had ever seen. She held onto Benson's arm like a lifeline. He was effortless, moving through the crowd with a king's grace, introducing her with a proud, "This is Adana Nwosu, the brilliant mind behind our new sustainable housing initiative." But she felt the other eyes on her. The women in couture dresses that probably cost more than her annual salary. Their smiles polished and their assessments razor-sharp. She overheard a snippet of conversation from a group of older socialites as she passed by the restroom. Such a Cinderella story. Quite pretty, I suppose, in a common way. And that child. Well, it's very modern of Benson, isn't it? Taking on another man's. The rest was lost, but the damage was done. Common. Another man's. The words echoed in her head, amplifying her every misstep. Was her accent too strong? Was her handshake not firm enough? Did everyone know the price tag of her dress was a fraction of theirs? She grew quieter, retreating into a shell of polite smiles. Benson, busy navigating the political undercurrents of the room, noticed her withdrawal but misattributed it to fatigue. The final blow came from an unexpected source. A few days after the gala, Benson's sister, Neka, insisted on meeting for lunch. Neka was everything Adana wasn't. Old money, impeccably connected, and fiercely protective of her brother. The lunch was a masterclass in polite condescension. Neka asked pointed questions about Adana's charming little apartment in Suralere. She expressed admiration for single mothers who managed to get by. She spoke of Benson's legacy, the Adebayo name, and the importance of a wife who could be a true partner in every sphere, her gaze lingering meaningfully on Adana's left hand, which bore no ring. "My brother has a tender heart," Neka said, sipping her tea. "Especially after being so focused on business for so long. He can be drawn to projects, to people who need fixing. One just hopes he's thinking with his head and not just his heart this time." The message was clear. Adana was a charity case. Project. A risk to the pristine Adebayo legacy. That night, as Benson sat comfortably on the floor of her apartment helping Kamsi build a block tower, the doubt erupted. "Why are you doing this, Benson?" The question came out sharper than she intended. He looked up, surprised by her tone. "Doing what? Building a tower? The structurally unsound, I admit. Kamsi's design needs work." "Not that," Adana said, wrapping her arms around herself. "This. Here. In my small apartment playing on the floor. You could have anyone. Women from your world with flawless pedigrees and no baggage. Women your sister wouldn't have to warn you about." Benson's playful expression vanished. He carefully placed a block on the tower. Campsie, go show Teddy your tall building in the other room for a minute. Once the child had toddled off, he stood up, his full height suddenly feeling imposing in the small space. What did my sister say to you? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. It doesn't matter what she said. She's not wrong, is she? Adana's voice trembled. I am a project to you, aren't I? The poor single mother you rescued. Is this all just part of your philanthropy? A more hands-on approach to charity? The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. She saw the flash of hurt in his eyes before his expression shuddered into the unreadable mask of the billionaire CEO. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint babble of Campsie in the next room. Do you really believe that? He finally asked, each word measured. After everything? You think my heart is a ledger book? That my time is so worthless I'd spend it on a project? He took a step closer, and she could see the emotion he was holding tightly in check. I didn't fall in love with a pedigree, Adana. I fell in love with a woman who has more strength in her little finger than most of those people have in their entire bloodlines. I fell in love with a mind that sees the world not for what it is, but for what it could be. I fell in love with a mother whose love for her child is the most powerful force I have ever witnessed. He gestured around the small, cluttered, warm apartment. This is not you fitting into my world. This is me finally finding a world worth living in. This noise, this mess, this life, this what I've been missing. He stopped, his chest rising and falling with a breath he seemed to have been holding. The only doubt I have, he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper, is whether I am enough for you, whether I can be the man you and Campsie deserve. The confession shattered her. All her insecurities, her fears of not being enough, were reflected back at her in his own vulnerability. He wasn't her savior. He was her partner, and he was just as terrified of losing this as she was. The doubt didn't vanish instantly, but its power over her broke. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. He held her tightly, his chin resting on her head. Don't doubt this, he murmured into her hair. Don't doubt us. The rift hadn't broken them. It had forced them. The doubt, once spoken and met not with anger but with a love so profound it mirrored her own fears, evaporated like morning mist under a strong sun. What remained was a deeper, more solid certainty. Adana no longer saw herself as an outsider in Benson's world. She saw herself as the one who had brought its heart home. Their lives began to weave together seamlessly. Campsie had a designated drawer for her toys in his penthouse, and a framed picture of the three of them at the beach sat on his desk, right beside the financial reports. The Eco-Al project was weeks from its official public launch. The model community was no longer just lines on paper. Its foundations were poured. Its first walls were rising, a physical testament to Adana's vision and Benson's faith. The pressure was immense, but it was a pressure they now shouldered together, often working late in his office, the city lights twinkling below like a field of diamonds. One such evening, Adana was finalizing the presentation for the board. Benson was supposedly reviewing contracts at his desk, but she caught him watching her, a soft, unreadable expression on his face. What? She asked, smiling. Do I have a smudge on my face? No, he said, his voice quiet. I was just thinking how you look most beautiful like this, in your element, full of fire and purpose. He stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I have something to show you, a last-minute addition to the project I want your opinion on. She frowned. A last-minute addition? Benson, the plans are finalized. The board won't like changes this late. This one, I think they'll approve, he said, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. It's on site. Let's take a drive. Curious, and never able to resist his occasional bouts of whimsy, she gathered her things. He drove them himself, away from the glittering business districts, toward the developing site on the city's outskirts. The site was quiet at night, bathed in the silver glow of security lights, the skeletal structures of the houses casting long shadows. It's the model home, he explained, leading her by the hand past the construction fencing. I wanted to see the courtyard under the moonlight, see if the feeling is right. The model home was complete, a perfect physical manifestation of her designs. He led her through the unfinished garden, through the arched entrance of the courtyard. The space was magical at night. The moon illuminated the pale earth-block walls, and the central space felt both open and intimate, peaceful and alive with potential. In the center of the courtyard, something was different. Where her plans had indicated a simple decorative feature, a new structure had been built. It was a beautiful, low-slung bench, crafted from rich, dark Irako wood, elegantly carved with patterns that echoed the traditional motifs Shed incorporated throughout the design. It was clearly not a standard issue piece. It was a work of art. "This is the addition?" she asked, walking toward it, her architect's eye admiring the craftsmanship. "It's stunning, Benson, but it's a bench. Why would the board care about a bench?" "This isn't just any bench," he said. His voice hushed in the quiet night. He guided her to sit on it. The wood was smooth and cool beneath her. "This is the first thing that will be placed in every courtyard of every eco-isle home. It's called the Heart of the Home bench." He sat beside her, not looking at her, but out at the courtyard. "The marketing copy will say it's a place for families to gather, for parents to watch their children play, for neighbors to share stories. And that's true." He finally turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his eyes were serious, full of a terrifying vulnerability. "But for me, this bench, this first one, is where my heart found its home. It's where I finally understood what I was building all of this for." He reached into the pocket of his jacket. He didn't get down on one knee. The gesture was more intimate than that. He simply took her hand and placed a small, cool object in her palm. It wasn't a ring box. It was a single, polished earth block, the size of a large coin. One side was smooth. On the other side, set perfectly into the baked clay, was a diamond. It wasn't a massive, gaudy stone. It was elegant, brilliant, and looked as if it had grown naturally from the earth itself. It was utterly unique. It was them. "The sustainable choice," he said, a faint smile touching his lips before his expression grew solemn again. "A foundation of earth and a promise that will last forever." He closed her fingers around it, his hand enveloping hers. "This project, this company, this life, it was all just steel and glass and numbers until you walked into it. You and Campsie. You are the heart of the home I never knew I was trying to build. You are my why." His voice was thick with emotion. "Adana Nwosu, will you build a life with me? Will you marry me?" Adana looked down at the extraordinary token in her hand, a perfect symbol of their love. Strong, grounded, beautiful, and enduring. She looked at the bench, at the house, at the man who had seen her worth when she'd been dismissed, who had fought for her, who loved her daughter as his own, and who had crafted a proposal so deeply personal it felt like a sacred vow. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She didn't need to think. The answer had been written in every shared look, every quiet moment, every challenge overcome together. She threw her arms around his neck, the tiny earth block clutched tightly in her hand. "Yes," she whispered against his skin, her voice cracking with emotion. "Yes, Benson. 1,000 times, yes." He held her tightly, his own relief and joy palpable. Under the Nigerian moon, in the courtyard of the home she had designed, surrounded by the promise of the future they would create, the billionaire and the architect sealed their promise not with a traditional ring, but with a foundation of earth and a diamond of unwavering love. The wedding was not a mere social event. It was a national spectacle, a fusion of two worlds that captivated the entire country. It was held on the grounds of the nearly completed eco-isle project, a symbolic choice that resonated deeply. The vibrant, geometric patterns of Adana's asoebi fabrics echoed the designs of the houses rising around them. The air, thick with the scent of jollof rice, roasting suya, and the heady fragrance of tropical flowers, was alive with the sounds of a high-life band and the joyful chatter of guests. There were business titans in Agbada's worth a fortune, rubbing shoulders with Adana's university friends and colleagues from her freelance days. Benson's stern-faced board members found themselves dancing with Adana's aunties from the village. It was a glorious, beautiful chaos, exactly as it should be. As they exchanged vows under a canopy woven with fresh flowers and native grasses, Benson's eyes never left Adana's. He spoke his promises not with the cool precision of a CEO, but with the raw, unwavering conviction of a man who had found his true north. When he slipped the unique earth block and diamond ring onto her finger, a collective sigh of delight swept through the crowd. But the true moment that sealed the day, the one that would be forever etched in every guest's memory, came just after the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. As Benson leaned in to kiss his bride, a small figure in a puff-sleeve dress matching her mother's toddled determinately up the aisle, clutching a small satin pillow. It was Campsie, now 3, her curls perfectly coiled, her face a picture of solemn importance. She'd been supposed to walk with the ring bearer, but had gotten stage fright. Now, seeing her mother and her Benson so happy, her courage returned. She tugged on the leg of Benson's impeccably tailored agbada. "Benson, my turn." The guests erupted in laughter and joyful tears. Benson broke the kiss, looked down, and his face split into the most genuine, unguarded smile of the day. Without a moment's hesitation, he bent down and swept her up into his arms, holding her between him and Adana, their first and most important blessing. The photograph that made the front page the next morning was not of the kiss. It was of this moment. The radiant bride laughing through her tears, the mighty billionaire holding his daughter with fierce tenderness, and the little girl beaming between them, the true architect of their love story. 1 year later, the penthouse was no longer a sterile showpiece. It was a home. A child's colorful drawings were magnetized to the stainless steel refrigerator. A well-loved teddy bear sat propped on a multi-million naira sculpture. The silence was regularly broken by giggles, lullabies, and the sound of little feet running on the polished floors. Benson stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his home office, looking out at the city he had helped shape. He was reviewing a contract on his tablet, but his attention was divided. From the living room, he could hear Adana's voice, gentle and patient, reading a bedtime story to Campsie. He finished his review, signed the document with a swift digital flourish, and set the tablet down. The corporate empire could wait. He walked out of his office, loosening his tie. Campsie, hearing his approach, came tearing out of the living room, her nightgown flowing behind her. She launched herself at his legs with a happy shriek. "Daddy, you're home." The word, spoken with such easy, unconditional love, still had the power to steal his breath. He scooped her up, settling her on his hip. "I am home, my little queen," he said, kissing her cheek. He looked over at Adana, who was leaning in the doorway, watching them with a soft, contented smile. She was glowing, her hand resting unconsciously on the gentle swell of her stomach. A new secret, a new promise they had only just begun to share. He carried Campsie over to the large, comfortable sofa, sitting down with her. Almost immediately, as she had done on the very first day they met, Campsie found his tie. It was a different tie, silk from Milan, but her fascination was unchanged. She grabbed it with her small fist, giggling as she gave it a playful tug. Benson didn't resist. He let her pull him down, making the same silly face that had made her laugh in that corporate hallway a lifetime ago. She erupted in laughter, the same pure, bell-like sound that had once disarmed the lion of Lagos and led him to his heart. Adana came over and sat beside them, leaning her head on his shoulder. She placed her hand over his, their fingers intertwining over the earth-block diamond on her finger. He looked around the room, at the toys on the floor, the woman he loved at his side, the child who called him daddy playing with his tie, the sprawling business empire, the skyscrapers with his name on them, the billions in the bank. It all paled in comparison to this. This noise, this mess, this perfect, loving chaos. Benson Adebayo had spent a lifetime building an inheritance of wealth and power. But here, in this room, he had received his true inheritance. A love built not on a foundation of concrete and steel, but on a moment of understanding in a hallway, sealed with a child's giggle and a mother's courage. It was the only fortune that mattered, and he would spend the rest of his life cherishing it.